So our next, so we're starting a new panel here on inquiry with 3 presentations that deal with pedagogy. And our first speaker is Tiphaine Abenia, that we're a good friend who we're very happy to have with us virtually. Tiphaine is in Lausanne at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. Merci Tiphaine d'être avec nous.
Merci Thomas Bernard.
Et voilà, la parole est à toi.
Merci. But I'm really sorry I was not able to come physically to share those 2 days of discussion with you. But I'm really happy and grateful for Thomas Bernard, Carole, Anne, who made it possible for me to be from Lausanne to share some thoughts with you. The presentation I will share with you was for me an opportunity to take a little step to the side to look at the course I'm now teaching for 2 years at EPFL in Lausanne, entitled Architectural Tomography, and the title of this presentation. So yeah, it was for me a chance to engage in a reflexive journey related to this specific pedagogical experience. When I've been invited to imagine a technical drawing course at EPFL for all the first-year students entering architecture at EPFL, so each year it's between 250 and 300 students, as part of the LIF laboratory, Laboratoire Imaginaire et Fabrication, directed by the architect Jo Tailleux, I asked myself, what does it mean really to teach a course of technical drawing in an architectural curriculum? Architects are neither drafting technicians or engineers, and drawing in architecture, as we saw it today, far exceeds a neutral technological process. So to start, I went back to the very basics, to elements of definition and history of this specific kind of representation, trying to identify somehow the essence or main features of it. In the history of architecture, technical drawing appeared and developed with the aim to describe and precisely communicate dimensional and constructive characteristics so that the building could be erected accordingly. In that sense, technical drawing holds from the start a prescriptive function. This function can be traced back, for example, to the rise of descriptive geometry, and is characterized by, first of all, the use of conventional graphic procedures such as orthogonal and parallel projection, creating an understanding of a 3-dimensional object onto 2-dimensional surface planes. One particularity of technical drawing is then that it relies very strongly on an operative dimension. It has to convey necessary and sufficient technical information to be executed by all the different actors present on the construction site. Based on that destination, technical drawing holds principles of rationality, measurability, and precision. Another characteristic is the existence of norms of representation. To be an effective support of communication, technical drawing also relies on specific codification and uses standardized conventions such as symbols, unit of measurement, notational systems, specific page layouts, etc. So yeah, in Switzerland, we have, for instance, the norm SIA, for architect and engineer, that frames those conventions, standards, and regulation, and is continuously reviewed, revised, and updated. Finally, technical drawing should be univocal. As Deforge puts it, the technical drawing avoids ambiguity. The ambiguity can only come from a fault against the rule of necessary and sufficient information, or from an incorrect presentation. All those features somehow converge to the prescriptive function I mentioned earlier, attached to technical drawing. This function played an important role in the stratification and hierarchization of knowledge. The splits we observe until today between matter and form, between thinking and making, or between architect and craftsman, woman, is directly inherited from it. Those binary oppositions are attached to a certain paradigm, sometimes found under the name of hylomorphism, with reference to Gilbert Simondon's work, for which technical drawing played a decisive role, subordinating the builder to the architect. Through it, the artisanal labor of construction and the intellectual labor of designing were divided. a division that builds on a paradigm of domination that we should, of course, question. Then where to stand, because as you remember, I was still in charge of a technical drawing course. As the saying goes, the master tool will never dismantle the master's house. And the will, of course, was not to reject as a whole technical drawing, as there are a lot of skills still attached to it. But the idea was rather to question it from within. Maybe the master tools could somehow subvert a bit, or at least be expanded. To carry out this critical expansion of technical drawing function, we decided with Jo to work with first-year students on the notion of tomography. This notion helped us distance ourselves from the pure prescriptive side of technical drawing and to explore its potential as a tool of investigation. It was going back to the Greek etymology of the word, tomography. In Greek, tomos means section, piece cut off, and graphia means to write, record, represent by line drawing. So by definition, tomography is then a technique of investigation that allows, through iterative sections, the detection and analysis of internal spatial structures. In series, it makes possible the reconstruction of the spatial entirety of an organism or an object. It has been used in archaeology, geology, and of course in medicine, where the famous computed tomography scan is a medical imaging technique used to obtain detailed internal images of the body. In all those disciplines, tomography always relies on the idea of investigation. But architecture was not left aside, and we already discussed it a bit this morning with the first presentation. In particular, the new vision in medicine also irrigated architecture. Among the lines of transfer between medicine and architecture, the capacity to optically penetrate areas previously invisible, creating a new kind of vision, a new paradigm of the inside-outside relationship, was a highly stimulating path quickly translated in architecture. To reveal the spatial and constructive anatomy of a building, to give access to its gravity-fed morphology, and to make visible inner spatial structures otherwise inaccessible to vision. But beyond the revelation of a built form, tomography allows to go beyond the narrow limits of architecture read as an object to investigate its relational setting to a wider environment. As explored in geology and archaeology, sectional drawing in architecture allows connection to the ground in all its thickness, natural topography, networks, underground infrastructures, etc., like we see here with the result of a studio led by Françoise Romono in Rotterdam. Tomography also carries a certain notion of intimacy, revealing the otherwise hidden interior, sometimes on the borderline of voyeurism, like here in Dillers Copidio and Renfro's project for a slow house. Tomography can reveal the way architecture is inhabited, experienced, lived daily. Back at EPFL, we transferred the understanding of the notion to work on a selection of unconventional houses. Each year, for the 250 students, we choose around 10 houses, selected for their rich spatial features, their strong link to the environment, and their ability to question the heteronormative framework attached to the single-family home. From there, we gather all the documentation we can find: text, photos from the worksite, but also post-occupancy photos, drawing, video, both documentaries and fiction. And for each house, the collection of documentation ends up to be extremely heterogeneous, but also partial, incomplete. It serves as the main material for the students to conduct their investigation. The architectural tomography course then unfolds in 4 acts or 4 exercises. I propose to just look more closely at acts 2 and 4 that I think are the outcomes that maybe could bring the more discussion. After a first act, in which the student cuts through the entire house and its surroundings, a second act proposes an in-depth constructive investigation at the scale 1:1. Practically speaking, each student works analog on a junction of interest within the house and brings on hypotheses on how things hold together. For this act, we leave the choice of the medium and techniques totally open. We only ask the student to think of the expressivity of the drawing, of its intelligibility. It turns out the outcomes are extremely diverse. Pencils, paints, collages, markers, not only the techniques, but also the attitudes towards representation are multiple. Some drawings, for instance, are very figurative. Some are much more abstract. Some speaks about the execution of the work, others sticks to Swiss conventions. This liberation from conventional techniques allowed us to replace, in dialogue with the students, convention and codification as cultural constructs. It also introduces subjectivity in this second act, pushing the student to bring their own skills, their own desires, and their own voices into the investigation. In these acts, where information are often very incomplete, students ask whether their hypotheses are right or wrong. Well, on one hand, we cannot go on site, unfortunately, to check. But more importantly, the question to ask is rather, is my hypothesis rigorous, true to investigation? If technical drawing is introduced as an investigative tool, then rigorous protocols can take over the as-built reality. As a result, when we collect all the fragments together and we're creating like a condensed drawing of the house, different hypotheses for the same technical question can coexist and be sometimes contradictory. The other act I would like to share with you is the last one. It is a moment of convergence of all the research of the semester after 12 weeks in architecture school. It proposes a sort of collective stroll around each house through the movement of a section plane around it. Each student previously worked on a constructive profile of the investigated house. Then they unfolded two axonometries 45 degrees, just like a book opening along its binding, to obtain this kind of impossible to experience drawing merging the outside and the inside. Act 4 is then about assembling all the individual contributions within a studio. So it's the work of more or less 25 students. The semester-long inquiries are crystallized in a leporello, an accordion book. But this act is much more than just the additive collage of individual pieces. The collective drawing is a production and work in itself for the students. To assure, for example, transition and continuity through the whole drawing, students have to discuss and negotiate to fix common datum, for instance. They need to agree on what convention should be shared and what convention should be left to individual choices. They also have to take decisions regarding the narrative sequence. Where should we start the ballad? In which direction should we go? Those choices participate in the construction of a specific storytelling with specific rhythm and points of view. In this house, for instance, a pre-existing tree influenced greatly the whole design and organization of the house. So the student decided to place this oak tree at the very center of the leporello, turning it into the main character of the drawing. You can start imagining how life is inside. The inhabited dimension is very present. A lot of care is brought to details, giving a sense of intimacy. Here an example where the number of details is very high and the information very dense, but some other drawings are much more minimalist, talking also about the architecture or the specific context and culture of the house. Here, the house in Yokohama in Japan, for example. The leporello we are creating in the tomography course are continuous, ambiguous narrative system, and as such, I find them very familiar with the emaki, those Japanese illustrated horizontal drawings of painted hand scrolls that date back to Nara periods. Indeed, they share some common features. They are continuous, they speak of an art of the everyday life, and this is the last point important for us, they engage actively the reader. Emaki are drawn or stamped on very, very long rolls of paper or silk, sometimes measuring several meters. And so the reader has to unwind each scroll little by little, revealing the story as seen fit. In the case of the leporellos, they are not meant to be flat digital documents, as I keep showing you today on and on. They're actually meant to be folded books. And we do print them each year with the students to see and manipulate the drawing, to have a relation to it. Some drawings measure more than 4 meters, and to go through them, to handle them and manipulate them properly, you need to unfold only parts of it at the time. The view you have of the drawing is then always partial. The reason can be adapted and the narrative can be rearranged as we go, as it is always the fruit of many extrapolation, collective discussion, and reconstruction of fragmentary, if not contradictory data. So to conclude, way beyond its prescriptive function, technical drawing is here introduced and regarded as a fundamental and operational socio-technical tool. So the course is restarting actually next week, and I'm looking forward to continuing those exploration. I think working on this presentation was a great help to help me take a bit of distance and also think of the continuation of the course. So thank you. The journey continue.
Merci Tiphaine pour ta présentation. Je m'excuse, la voix manque aujourd'hui. I guess I'll ask it in English. The final collective drawings that you showed that are on the screen right now are really, really fantastic. And I was wondering if there's a discussion with the students about the possibility of other architectures and the possibility of perhaps starting from these drawings to design, I'll put here in quote, possible houses. So I don't know, because you start from reference houses to make these drawings, have you entertained the idea of doing the way back with them?
No, that's a super interesting question. And that's something we discussed not directly as like a start for a design phase, for example, but rather as, so when they present their drawing in the end, they present a narrative for the house, so a story, like a cadavresque. And this story is often quite different from the story of the house. So it's a story that is reconstructed from their understanding of the house. So they're actually through their storytelling already speaking about another house. But for now, the discussion at the beginning of the class was really to make a distinction between a design course, the studio course, and the technical drawing class. But I think that there is some cultural aspects and imagination parts that actually are really interlinked. So the division is not that clear. But that's a really motivating point.
Maybe it's the follow-up class.
Mm-hmm. Second semester.
Yeah.
Well, I had a follow-up question that leads exactly from what you just said. Tu ne me vois pas, hein, mais je suis là.
Je t'entends pas super bien.
Tu m'entends pas super bien. Est-ce que je vais m'approcher de la caméra? Est-ce que tu m'entends mieux ici?
Je pense que oui. Ouais.
Okay, bon, c'est bon. En fait, so the question is, because you've been teaching this for a couple of years now?
So I did it twice,
yep.
And I will start the third time next week.
So to follow up on Cal's question and your comment, I'm just wondering whether you have the students come back to you from later years, the ones that have gone through this, and or have you personally seen differences in the way that they design because of this? Because this goes beyond kind of the technical requirements as you've presented. But do you see any evidence of the thinking that you're putting into the studio in later years?
Yeah, I think thanks to professors I know that are, for example, teaching studio in the following class, that there is a change in the way to approach drawing as a space to ask questions through drawing, and this is something that I've been told after this course that was shifting in the studio part in second semester and second year. There is something like we see here as well with the idea of decision. So it's technical drawing, but you can see with the roofs that there are actually several decisions that are being taken by the students. And this opening about the way we represent is not just protocol or led to convention, but there is actually something to say. There is a word that can be chosen right from the very first week in architecture, that there is actually an understanding of the culture of drawing and where conventions are coming from. And that allows students to open a discussion where there are studio directors and professors afterwards to question basically the convention and to also shift them if they wish so.
Are there further questions or comments for Tiphaine? Or in the chat? Ça va, mais merci Tiphaine, j'espère que tu restes avec nous un peu plus longtemps.
Encore au moins jusqu'à votre pause de midi.
Good. Perfect, thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.